Last week we looked at 5 out of the 10 times that Israel had tested God and had proved him and had seen that he was trustworthy and that he was for them and not against them. Yet, even when they had seen that he was trustworthy, they still believed that he would forsake them and destroy them. They still refused his rest. Today, we look at 5 more times that God's rest was rejected by Israel. You're watching the New Kosmos Videocast.
This is the New Kosmos Videocast. You've never heard it like this anywhere. Welcome.
And good day, good morning, good evening, good night to you wherever and whenever you're watching me. This is your brother and friend Maurice, and we are talking about the new creation rest. Our topic is 5 more times God's rest was rejected. And this is the 8th video of this series. To see the previous videos, I will put the link to the series playlist on the top right hand corner of this video, or you may visit the New Kosmos Videocast channel and look in the playlist, The New Creation Rest. And before we jump into the study, if you find value in this content, please like, please share, and please subscribe. And if you wish this channel to continue, consider becoming a member at patreon.com/newcosmos. There, you'll find 4 membership tiers. If you choose the 2nd, 3rd, or the 4th tiers, you can have access to my videos up to 2 weeks before they are released on YouTube. And you can download my books for free in PDF format. Additionally, the 3rd or 4th tiers give you access to the New Kosmos Master Class. Now, the last study we talked about 5 times God's rest was rejected. And so today we are going to talk about 5 more times God's rest was rejected. We're going to begin with Numbers 14, which we did in our last study. So we're going to bridge back to Numbers chapter 14 from the English Standard Version, reading from verse 22. And this is speaking about Israel in the wilderness, and God pronounces this judgment on that first generation of adults which had come out of Egypt into the wilderness and continued to display distrust in him, having no confidence in him, and were restless. Look what the Lord said in verse 22. None of the men who had seen my glory and my signs that I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have yet put me to test these 10 times. So here are the 10 times that we are talking about. So we looked at 5 before, and this study we're going to look at the remaining 5, and have not obeyed my voice. None of them shall see the land that I swore to give to their fathers, and none of those who despised me shall see it. So notice in Numbers chapter 14, God said, none of the men shall see the land. And in Psalm 95, again, this is what we looked at last study, but we are just going over it for effect. Psalm 95, verse 10, the Lord said, for 40 years I loathed that generation, that same generation we talked about there in Numbers 14, who despised him, right? Who saw his miraculous works, who saw his saving grace and his mercies towards Israel, yet they despised him. He says, I loathed that generation, and I said, they are a people who go astray in their hearts. You know, it's a mind problem, it's a heart problem, it's a spiritual problem, and they have not known my ways. They refuse to set their mind upon the goodness of God. Therefore, I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. In other words, these people were restless in their mind, in their spirit, and so therefore they could not enter God's rest. So let's begin with the 6th time that Israel tested the Lord. Remember, we talked about the 10 times in Numbers chapter 14. We went through the first 5 in the previous study. If you didn't watch that, you can go back, look in the playlist, and find that video. And then you can come and continue with this one, because this essentially is the part 2. So the sixth time that Israel tested the Lord in the wilderness, it's when Moses ascended to Mount Sinai to obtain the 10 Commandments from the Lord. And we'll pick up that narrative in Exodus 32. Exodus 32, and we're going to read from we're going to not read the entire chapter, but we're going to read verses 1 to 4. Beginning at verse 1, it says, "When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, 'Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him.' So Aaron said to them, 'Take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me.' So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graven tool and made a golden calf. And they said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.'" Wow. So even as the list of times that the Lord delivered them grew, the distrust of these people seemed to increase equally. Now, just keep in mind that just a few, maybe days ago, remember they were at Mount Sinai. And here is where they had just recently heard the voice of the Lord speaking the 10 Commandments. And remember, they were terrified and they said, "Moses, we do not want to hear God's voice because we are afraid he is going to kill us." The same old story. And they said, "Moses, you go and listen and hear what God has to say and come and tell us." So Moses went up on Mount Sinai, went to the top of Mount Sinai, just what they told him to do. And 40 days and 40 nights had passed. And now they're saying, "Well, we don't know what happened to this man who had brought us up." They said to Aaron, "Make us gods." Now, what kind of gods do you think Aaron would make? He would make Egyptian gods because they had just come out of Egypt with the Egyptian culture, the Egyptian religion. So this calf was an Egyptian god. Okay, that's why it was a calf, because that was the kind of God they were accustomed to. And that was why they could not bring themselves to trust the one true living God, because they were accustomed to these false gods. It was always in their mind that Yahweh God was like one of these so-called gods of Egypt. After all of that manifestation that God did on Mount Sinai, where there was the lightning, they had the ground was shaking, there was smoke pouring out on the top of the mountain, there was fire. How could they entertain the thought? Just a few, I don't know how many days had passed, but a few days later, a few moments later, how could they entertain the thought that he had abandoned them? Even after he had said in the very first preliminary to giving them the 10 Commandments, he says, "I am the God who delivered you out of the house of bondage, out of slavery." How could they entertain the thought that he had abandoned them? Even after he had delivered them through the Red Sea, delivered them from Pharaoh's army, from certain death. And even before that, worked all of these miraculous plagues and signs, destroying the economy of Egypt so that Egypt was forced to let them go, which he said would happen. And yet, they still could not get rid of the Egyptian god in their minds. Because the Egyptian gods, being the figments of men's imagination, the creations of man in the imagination, the Egyptian gods did not care for the people because the Egyptian gods were really the creation of the self-serving priests of Egypt. Okay? But this was the true and living God. And when he had revealed himself to Moses, he says, "I am forgiving of iniquity, transgression, and sin." Right? Anyway, Israel chose not to look at their past deliverances. And actually, we see here that they actually began to now attribute those deliverances to the Egyptian gods. Notice what they said to the people. He says, and he, that is Aaron, I want you to listen to this very carefully, because there's a slight bit of evidence in how it is worded. He, that is Aaron, received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they, that's the people, said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. So they, the people now, instead of attributing their deliverance to the one true living God, they turned back and attributed their deliverance to the Egyptian gods, the gods of Egypt. Right? So you can understand, or it is understandable, how God would be really upset with this. So let's look at verse 35. You can read the entire, if you don't know what happened, you can read the entire chapter, you'll see what happened. But I'm just going to jump down to the last verse of chapter 32. It says there, then the Lord sent a plague as a consequence of all of this. The Lord sent a plague on the people because they made the calf, the one that Aaron made. Remember this calf, what it represented? It represented the Egyptian gods, the gods of Egypt, who the people said were responsible, or was responsible, for delivering them out of Egypt. Good? So the plague came upon them for worshiping these false gods. In other words, now, God was teaching them that these gods had no power to protect them. If these were truly the gods that brought them out of Egypt, then these same gods should have protected them from the plagues. Because you remember, when they were in Egypt, when they were in Goshen, and all the plagues were raining upon Egypt, the people of Goshen were largely protected. Okay? Yes, for some of the plagues, they were affected, but not in any major way. Especially the plague of the firstborn, they were not touched at all. Good? The plague of darkness, the entire Egypt had darkness, while in the land of Goshen there was light. Okay? So if really and truly, these were the gods that brought them out of Egypt, then they should have been protected from this plague as well. But they couldn't rest, because they still had in their mind the Egyptian false gods, the Egyptian false doctrine. Look, let's go over to the next chapter here, Exodus 33, and we're going to read verse 3 to 5. Let's look at some further evidence. Let's read from verse 1 for context. The Lord said to Moses, depart, go up from here, you and the people whom you have brought up out of the land of Egypt, to the land which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, to your offspring I will give it. I will send an angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Now this is immediately after we had this controversy with them building this golden calf. Okay, go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go up among you, lest I consume you on the way, for you are a stiff-necked people. So God was saying, I am not going to go. You can go, I'm not going. Now, when the people heard this disastrous word, they mourned, and no one put on his ornaments. Okay, now remember, these ornaments were when they left Egypt, they asked the Egyptians to give them gold and jewelry and so on. And so the Egyptians heaped all of these ornaments on them. So these were largely Egyptian jewelry, which was mostly little idols, little figurines of the Egyptian gods. So they were, not only did they have the Egyptian mindset or the Egyptian religion in their mind, but they were also wearing these Egyptian ornaments with the Egyptian idols. Okay, now some people use this verse because, let me just read on here a bit. No one put on his ornaments. Verse 5, for the Lord had said to Moses, say to the people of Israel, you are a stiff-necked people. If for a single moment I should go up among you, I would consume you. So now take off your ornaments that I may know what to do with you. So some people used this verse to teach that jewelry is sinful. Okay? Now, this is not the case, okay? This is not the case because there are many verses in the Bible which speak positively of jewelry. Good? So we have to rightly divide the word. We have to exegete properly and in context. This particular jewelry here was the figurines and little idols of the Egyptian gods, which the people now had associated in their minds with Egyptian gods and worshiping the Egyptian gods, right? So that is why God told them to take it off, right? To further separate them from these Egyptian doctrine. Good? So now, so God said, take off your ornaments. And in verse 6 it says, therefore the people of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments from Mount Horeb onward. But if you read later on in other books of the Bible, you will see that this is not forever. The people of Israel regularly, as a matter of culture, wore jewelry. The women adorned themselves, especially when they were brides. The high priest had designs of gold on their robes. So at this point in time here, God was dealing with this specific issue where the Egyptian ornaments were linked to the Egyptian god worship. So in the minds of the people, there was still a superstitious link between the ornaments and their idea that they were these other Egyptian gods, right? So God had to teach them a harsh lesson that there are no other gods but Him. So they must learn to focus on Him and to trust Him. Let's move on to the seventh time they tested the Lord, complaining at Taberah. And that's Numbers chapter 11. Numbers chapter 11. Reading from verse 1, it says there, and the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes. And when the Lord heard it, His anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some outlying parts of the camp. Now, on the surface, this might seem very unreasonable. Now, does God not want us to let our troubles be known? Is He upset when we cry out in anguish and pain? Doesn't He care when we are meeting trial and tribulation? Of course, God cares. And God wants us to cry out to Him. God wants us to cast our cares upon Him. God wants us to bring our burdens to Him. So the context here of Israel complaining was because of their restlessness. Now let me just give you an illustration here. Many of us, if not most of us, are parents, or we don't even have to be a parent. We ourselves, when we were children, would know this is true. Have you ever observed a child playing for hours straight? I mean, like from morning to night, a child could play. They could run, they could climb, they could roll around, they could crawl in the mud, they can scrape their knees, they can cut their elbows, and all of it is laughter and merriment, and they're so happy and they're so joyful playing. All the play, they do not remember or focus, or they ignore that they have scraped their elbow, that they have scraped their knee. All the play and the merriment, they ignore that various parts of their body are hurting. They even forget that they are hungry and that they are tired. I know when I was a little boy, I was like that. Yet, when you ask that same child to walk with his book bag a few blocks to school, his whole demeanor would change. Oh, they would, all of a sudden, the book bag is too heavy. Oh, my feet are sore. My legs are tired. Oh, I'm hungry. Oh, I'm thirsty. Oh, and the complaints would go on and on. And this was what was happening with Israel. And so God knew that Israel was more than able to make that journey, especially when He was accompanying them and He was providing for them and He was protecting them, right? He knew that they were more than able to make that journey. Yes, it would be strict. No one said it would be easy, but it was not impossible, nor was it unreasonable. Yet, they were continually listening to the complainers among them and taking up those complaints. Now look at this. Let's go back to verse 1. Look what it says. His anger, that's God's anger, was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some outlying parts of the camp. Take note of that. Some outlying parts of the camp. Good? Now, what does that tell you? Some outlying parts of the camp. What does that tell you? That tells you, let's look at it in the New English translation, right? Let's look at it in the New English translation. It says there, so the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outer parts of the camp. Okay? So that should give you a little more information there. It is significant that the Lord removed those complainers who were on the outer parts of the camp, on the uttermost part, the fringes, the outskirts. For this is where those with the complaining mindset are normally found. In any group, you always find the complainers, and they are usually on the outskirts. They are usually sit in the back, and then they form their own group and they begin to whisper, oh, such and such is not qualified. Oh, why are they doing it this way? Oh, they think that they are more than other. And they begin to spread these little venomous little lies, these little complaints. They raise every little problem and make it a mountain. On the outskirts of the camp are where these people are normally found. So God dealt with them. And by this time, it was becoming apparent that the people were unwilling to change their opinion of God from the Egyptian type picture that they had in their mind of God to the truth about the one true living God, even though they had ample evidence in front of them. It seemed that they would be only pleased if their wrong-headed view of God was proven true. In other words, they wanted Moses and Aaron and God to fail in their mission of bringing Israel to the promised land. They wanted God to destroy the people in the wilderness so that they might be satisfied and say, aha, we were right about Yahweh God. Now that might seem far-fetched, but I have personally witnessed people who delight in the failures of others, even at their own detriment, just so that they can be proven right in their own opinion. So even if it means they have to suffer, they still wish that this person or this group or this leader fails so that they can say, aha, you see, I told you. Let's look at the 8th time Israel tested God in the wilderness, and that's at the incident with the manna. Numbers 11, reading from verse 4. Says, now the rabble that was among them had a strong craving, and the people of Israel also wept again and said, oh, that we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt that cost nothing, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our strength is dried up, and there is nothing at all but this manna to look at. And the nothing at all that they talked about there was the manna that God provided every day for the 6 days, and there was none on the 7th day, so they could collect double on the 6th day. So they got tired, they grew tired of the regular supply of manna that was being miraculously provided for them. You know, as the saying goes, familiarity breeds contempt. The Israelites had for a long time been romanticizing the appalling conditions of their past in Egypt. They had become nostalgic for a time when they were brutally enslaved. And this showed that they had willingly forgotten or minimized the horror of their bondage so that they may despise God's providence. God was supernaturally providing manna for them every day, yet they showed contempt for this miracle and complained that it was not diverse enough. And their attitude showed that they were looking back to Egypt rather than forward to the promised land, which was again evidence of their rejection of God's promise and their restlessness. Let's move on to number 9. Miriam and Aaron's rebellion. Now, Miriam was Moses and Aaron's sister, and Aaron and Moses were the priest, the high priest of Israel, and the leaders of Israel. So, Numbers chapter 12 and verse 2. Let's get our Bible up. So, reading from verse 1, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. And they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And the Lord heard it. So even the leadership was beginning to fall into pride and jealousy and challenging Moses' authority. His brother Aaron and his sister Miriam now, they became restless. They began openly expressing doubts about Moses' calling. Was it possible that they may have been listening to the voices of a so-called concerned few in the multitude? And this was even though God had conspicuously worked out many signs through Moses. And remember, at the beginning of the deliverance, while they were still in Egypt, God had said to Moses, these are the signs you need to work among Israel that they may believe that I sent you. And also, when they had been delivered out of Egypt and they came to Mount Sinai, that was also a sign that God had told Moses, when you see this happen, when you see Israel has been set free and have come to Mount Sinai, it would be a sign that I have chosen you. So they had many signs, they had many confirmation, they had much evidence that God had chosen Moses. Nevertheless, they began to get weary of the strictness of life in the wilderness. They began to say, well, maybe Moses is not hearing from the Lord correctly, and we, who are also his family members, God is speaking through us also. Now, they probably forgot that Aaron was the one who was influenced by the multitude to make a golden calf for the people to worship. Nevertheless, this fracture in the leadership would be the beginning of its end. So God had to swiftly deal with this problem among his leaders. So let's pick up the narrative in verse 5. And the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forward. And God said, hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth, clearly, and not in riddles. And he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? Okay, and let's jump down in verse 14. Verse 14, it says there, and the Lord said to Moses, speaking of Miriam, if her father had but spit in her face, should she not be ashamed 7 days? Let her be shut outside of the camp 7 days, and after that she may be brought in again. So Miriam was shut outside of the camp 7 days, and the people did not set out of the march on the march till Miriam was brought in again. What had happened, that Miriam became leprous. Good? Miriam had become leprous. Now, the fact that Miriam had contracted leprosy was again harkening back to, as a reminder, when the Lord had said to Moses, when Moses had said to the Lord, Lord, how will the people believe that you have sent me? And the Lord said to Moses, place your hand in your coat and take it out again. And when Moses took out his hand, it was leprous. And then the Lord said, put your hand back in again. And Moses put his hand back. And the Lord said, take it out. And it was normal. It was healed. So again, that sign showed that God had authority over disease. Good? This is the same disease now, the leprosy that Miriam contracted, to remind her that Moses is the one that God had chosen, the God who is able to heal the leprosy that she contracted. Good? So this was the sort of mentality that the people had, and God had to meet them at their level. This was the only way to get their attention. And let's look at the final, the number 10 time that Israel tested the Lord in the wilderness. Numbers chapter 13. And we'll read verses 1 and 2 for some context. It says there, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, everyone a chief among them. So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran, according to the command of the Lord, all of them men who were heads of the people of Israel. So they sent these 12 men over into the promised land, over the river Jordan, to just see what the land was like and bring back the news to the people. Good? So let's jump down to verse 25 now. I think most of us will know this narrative already. But anyway, at the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land, and they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told them, we came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is the fruit. Okay, so they brought back fruit from the land. However, the people who dwell in the land are what? Strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And beside, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negeb, the Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill country, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. So they're giving a report. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. Okay, so Caleb was one of those who was at rest. He was one who could look back all the way back to when they were in Egypt and remember the plagues that the Lord poured out in Egypt so that Egypt would set them free, when God destroyed the army of Pharaoh in the Red Sea, when God provided the sweet water, when God provided the manna, when God provided all the times throughout, all the way to when they came to this Jordan River, ready to cross over into Canaan land. He remembered all of that. And so he was at rest, and he says, listen, let us go up and occupy the land, for we are able to overcome it. How are they able? They are able because the Lord is with them. Not because they have any sort of human power, because as the spies had said, that these men, the cities were fortified, the cities were large, and the descendants of Anak, these are the giants, were there. Good? So Caleb wasn't looking at that. Caleb was looking at the size of his God. Good? Then the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great height, very tall, very massive people. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim, and we seem to ourselves like grasshoppers. Good? They said, basically comparing themselves to these people. They were like grasshoppers. Okay? So after just about 1 year after leaving Egypt and arriving at the border of the promised land, which was separated from them by the river Jordan, these spies went over, they came back, and they did testify that the land was abundant. That's what flowing with milk and honey meant. It's abundant, it is fruitful. And they brought back evidence of some of the fruit, but then they began to focus again on their ability and not God's ability. Good. Now, even though it only mentions Caleb here in Numbers 13, it was actually Caleb and Joshua. It was two of those spies who actually gave encouragement that the people should trust the Lord and his promises and go over into the land and take it. But the other 10 spies convinced the people otherwise, and the people easily would believe the negative report than the faith report. Good? So they surmise now, the people now surmise that, well, their journey all this way was for naught. So let's pick up in next chapter 14 from verse 1. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or that we had died in this wilderness. Now notice verse 3. Verse 3 is key. Why is the Lord, and the word Lord here is Yahweh. Lord in uppercase means Yahweh. That's the name. Why is Yahweh bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Now, was that what the Lord said he would bring them there to do? No, he says, I will bring you into this good land, and I will chase out all these tribes who are occupying, so that you may have this land. Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? They openly accused God of bringing them there to destroy them. And they were on the brink of obtaining the promise of God. And so I find that many times when we are almost at the breakthrough, that's the time when we quit. When we are almost at the breakthrough, that's the time we quit. And so that is why we need to be resting in the Lord. We need to be resting in the Lord, because when we rest in the Lord, I'm not saying that we would not have concerns. I'm not saying that everything would be smooth. I'm not saying everything would go as planned, okay? But resting in the Lord helps to calm your internal kingdom. Your spirit would be at rest. Look at the narrative in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 1 verse 27. And you murmured in your tents and said, because the Lord hated us. Notice again the accusation. He has brought us out of the land of Egypt to give us into the hand of the Amorites to what? Destroy us. Good? So this wasn't merely the people venting their frustration over adverse circumstances. They had fundamentally rejected who God was. They had rejected the faithfulness that he had displayed. They had rejected his promise. And as a result of their choice not to rest in God's promise, not to rest in his power, not to trust his personality, the Lord declared that all of the adults of that generation would never enter the promised land, except Joshua and Caleb. So we read that in Numbers 32, verse 9 to 13. Look what it says there. For when they went up to the valley of Eshcol and I saw the land, they discouraged the heart of the people of Israel from going into the land that the Lord had given them. And the Lord's anger was kindled on that day, and he swore, saying, surely none of the men who came up out of Egypt from 20 years old and upward shall see the land that I swore to give Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, because they have not wholly followed me. None except now Caleb the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua the son of Nun, for they have wholly or completely followed the Lord. And the Lord's anger was kindled against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness 40 years, until all the generation that had done evil in the sight of the Lord was gone. So all of the adults of that generation, except with the exception of Joshua and Caleb, died in that wilderness, and Joshua and Caleb were alive to take that second generation of Israel into the promised land. So because that generation, that first generation out of Egypt, who had been exposed to God's miraculous acts of deliverance, been exposed to God's providence, they still rejected it. They chose not to trust him. They chose not to have confidence in him. So they chose restlessness instead of his rest. And all the Sabbath days that they were keeping along that journey had lost their significance and were meaningless rituals, because the Sabbaths were simply signs and symbols of the true rest. And because they had not entered the true rest, they were not allowed to enter the promised land, which also was a physical sign or symbol of God's true rest. So for 2 decades, my denomination had told me that the rest that remained for God's new covenant people was found in a day of the week. But I discovered that God's rest is found in his Son, Jesus. That when we have faith in him, and when we trust him, and we have confidence in God's finished new creation work, which he wrought through him, that is how we can truly rest. And so we have come to the end of the 8th video in this series, The New Creation Rest. It was entitled 5 More Times God's Rest Was Rejected. And if you appreciate this content, please like, please share, and please subscribe. Remember, if you wish to support this ministry according to Galatians 6:6, you may give or become a Patreon member at patreon.com/newcosmos. And so until next time, I'm your friend Maurice saying, may God richly bless you.
This has been the New Kosmos Videocast. Remember to comment, like, subscribe, and share.